the Bible. Picture this, a 2,000-year-old book packed with stories about a talking snake, a guy who built a massive boat for a worldwide flood, and a carpenter who could literally walk on water and bring dead people back to life. Sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel, right? Except this book, the Bible, has sold more copies than there are people on Earth, and it basically wrote the script for America. Now, here's the thing. The Pilgrims didn't just bring this book along for bedtime stories. They used it to justify manifest destiny, convincing themselves that God personally wanted them to take Native American land. The Ten Commandments, still carved into courthouse walls today like they're part of the actual legal system. And then there's the sketchy part that historians love to debate. Some say the King James Version got a little edited to make slavery sound divinely approved, twisting Genesis 9 into a curse on black people. Fast forward to today, and 80% of Americans own a Bible, even though it's been banned in public schools since 1963. The church business in the U.S. is now worth a massive $100 billion. That's basically the Bible's greatest success story right there. One ancient book, endless influence, and a whole lot of controversy baked right into the foundation of this country. Uncle Tom's Cabin. So there's this novel from 1852 about an enslaved man named Tom who endures unimaginable suffering with Christ-like patience, watching families torn apart and enduring brutal beatings until his tragic death. The author, Harriet Beecher Stowe, didn't just write a book. She dropped an emotional bomb on America that nobody saw coming. Here's what happened next. White women across the North read it, ugly cried into their handkerchiefs, and then convinced their husbands to actually do something about slavery. It sold 300,000 copies in the first year alone, outselling even the Bible of all books. And the South? They absolutely freaked out so hard they banned it and called it abolitionist propaganda. When Abraham Lincoln met Stowe during the Civil War, he allegedly said, "So, you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war?"
But here's the twist that nobody talks about enough. The book that helped end slavery also gave us the term Uncle Tom, which became an insult for black people seen as too submissive to white authority. Talk about a complicated legacy. Still, this novel basically invented protest literature and proved that sometimes a story hits way harder than any political speech ever could. The Jungle. Imagine biting into a hot dog at a baseball game and then someone casually mentions that a century ago, that same sausage might have had actual human fingers in it. Welcome to the jungle. Upton Sinclair's 1906 nightmare novel follows a Lithuanian immigrant named Jurgis, who gets a job in Chicago's meatpacking plants and discovers that the industry is basically a full-blown horror show. We're talking rats getting ground into sausage, workers falling into vats and getting shipped out as lard, and poisoned meat being sold to unsuspecting families. Sinclair wanted Americans to care about immigrant workers getting exploited and abused, but instead people just stopped eating meat entirely. Vegetarian sales literally exploded by 400%, and the meatpacking companies panicked so hard they tried bribing Sinclair $25,000 to tone down the rat chapter. Spoiler, it didn't work. Within 6 months, America's stomach-turning rage forced the government to create the Pure Food and Drug Act, basically birthing the FDA and USDA overnight. Sinclair famously said, "I aimed for the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach." One book about worker exploitation accidentally created the entire regulatory state and made Americans question what's actually in their food for the first time ever. The Feminine Mystique. So picture this. It's 1963 and millions of suburban housewives are living the so-called American dream with white picket fences, freshly baked cookies, and perfectly ironed shirts. But behind those smile for the camera moments, they're secretly miserable and nobody's talking about it. Then Betty Friedan decided to give this quiet desperation a name. She called it The Problem That Has No Name. Turns out the problem was patriarchy. And her book became the handbook for an uprising. Within just a few years, 50,000 women ditched their kitchens for college campuses, demanding careers, equal pay, and the audacity to exist beyond being someone's wife or mother. No-fault divorce became a thing, and by 1980, about 40% of women were in the workforce. Second-wave feminism was officially born, and America would never be the same again. But here's where it gets messy, and people still argue about this today. Friedan mostly spoke to white, middle-class women, completely ignoring black and working-class struggles. Some declassified files even suggest the CIA funded Miss Magazine to split the left and weaken labor movements. And conservative icon Phyllis Schlafly literally burned the book on live TV. Love it or hate it, The Feminine Mystique rewired America's entire idea of what women could be and sparked debates we're still having today. Silent Spring. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the birds have stopped singing. No chirping, no tweets, just eerie silence blanketing everything. That's the haunting vision Rachel Carson painted in Silent Spring, her 1962 bombshell book about how pesticides, specifically DDT, were poisoning everything: birds, fish, soil, and yes, even kids playing in their backyards. Carson was a marine biologist who spent years researching how these so-called miracle chemicals were actually a slow-motion disaster causing cancer and wiping out entire species. The chemical industry absolutely lost it. They offered a $250,000 bounty to discredit her, called her hysterical and emotional because of course they did, and some claim the CIA even monitored her as a potential communist threat. 3 states tried banning the book outright, but Americans read it anyway, and suddenly everyone was terrified of invisible poisons in their air, water, and food. It was the first mass environmental panic, and honestly, it worked. Within a decade after DDT was banned, the Environmental Protection Agency was born, and Earth Day became a national thing. Carson essentially turned tree hugger into a legitimate career path and made environmentalism mainstream instead of fringe. She died of cancer just 2 years after the book dropped, but her work sparked a movement that's still fighting today. One woman with a microscope changed how America sees the planet and our responsibility to it.
1984. George Orwell's 1984 is about a guy named Winston Smith who works for the government, rewriting history and deleting people from records like they never existed. Oh, and Big Brother is always watching, literally everywhere with cameras, even in his apartment. The government controls language, thought, and even love itself. Winston tries to rebel by starting a secret affair and writing in a forbidden diary, but spoiler alert, the party crushes him, brainwashes him, and makes him love Big Brother by the end. Now here's the kicker. Orwell wrote this dystopian nightmare in 1949, but it basically predicted modern America in ways that are honestly uncomfortable. The term Orwellian is now in the dictionary, and we throw around words like thought crime and Big Brother like they're normal everyday vocabulary. Even Apple's iconic 1984 Super Bowl ad was directly inspired by this book. The NSA's mass surveillance program was literally named PRISM after Orwell's ideas about constant monitoring. After 9/11, when the Patriot Act rolled out with wiretaps and surveillance, Americans had serious déjà vu moments. Some even say the CIA funded an animated version to scare the Soviets during the Cold War. One book gave us the entire vocabulary for understanding the surveillance state we're living in today, and made us question how much freedom we're willing to trade for security. The Autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm X wasn't your typical civil rights leader with peaceful marches and measured speeches. This man went from street hustler selling drugs in Harlem to one of the most feared voices in America. His autobiography, written with Alex Haley, chronicles his wild transformation from prison convert to Nation of Islam firebrand preaching black separatism, and finally a Sunni Muslim who traveled to Mecca and realized unity was actually possible. Then, at just 39 years old, he was assassinated in front of his wife and children. But here's what made this book genuinely dangerous to the establishment. It turned anger into action and gave people permission to be unapologetic. After it dropped in 1965, the Nation of Islam membership tripled almost overnight. Young black Americans read it and said, "Enough with peaceful protests, we want power and we want it now." The Black Power movement was born, with fists raised high and unapologetically demanding respect instead of asking for it.
The FBI was so terrified they allegedly forged letters to create beef between Malcolm and his mentor Elijah Muhammad through their COINTELPRO program. Prisons banned the book for being too inflammatory, which of course only made it more legendary. Today, it's a required reading at 70% of HBCUs, and it didn't just radicalize Black America, it humanized Islam and showed that transformation is always possible, no matter where you start or what you've done.
Harry Potter.
So there's this scrawny 11-year-old kid living in a cupboard under the stairs, getting bullied by his awful relatives, when suddenly he finds out he's a wizard. His name is Harry Potter, and he gets whisked away to Hogwarts, a magical boarding school where he learns spells, plays Quidditch, and discovers that an evil, noseless fascist named Voldemort unalived his parents and is now hell-bent on taking over the wizarding world. Over 7 books, Harry and his friends battle Death Eaters, basically wizard Nazis, while learning about friendship, sacrifice, and standing up to tyranny, even when it's terrifying. But here's the real magic that people miss. This series didn't just entertain kids, it rewired an entire generation's political consciousness. Millennials and Gen Z grew up reading about prejudice against mudbloods and the dangers of blind loyalty to power, and suddenly they could spot propaganda and fascism in real life. Schools tried banning it in over 100 districts for promoting witchcraft, but that only made kids want to read it more. Obviously, forbidden fruit always tastes sweeter. The result? An $8 billion franchise that revived reading for young people and sparked the entire YA book boom. Scholastic stock shot up 700%, and 500 million kids worldwide learned that bigotry is bad, authority isn't always right, and standing up for what's right matters even when it's hard and scary. Then, J.K. Rowling's controversial stance on trans issues retroactively complicated the fandom and proved that even beloved creators can deeply disappoint. But the lessons? Those stuck around and shaped how a generation thinks about justice and power.
Thank you for watching. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to this channel. Remember, it's always America first.